Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, we have a truly inspiring guest who embarked on a journey from corporate to entrepreneurship with the mission to make workplaces happier and more productive. Today, I welcome Aoife O'Brien, the founder of Happier at Work, a business transformation expert with over 2 decades of experience working for global giants. In 2018, she made a life-altering decision, leaving her corporate role to take a career break. But that was just the beginning. Today, we'll unravel her journey, explore her insights, and uncover how she's reshaping the future of work. Let's go check it out. So our guest today is Aoife O'Brien. She is the founder of Happier at Work, also an expert in HR and organizational behavior with over 2 decades of experience solving complex business problems for global giants. And she's also a results-driven professional with a passion for data-driven solutions, which I love, right? Now, when I think about her journey, it's really a testament to the power of self-reflection and action. And today, she actually helps HR and business leaders create happier workplaces. And in addition to that, she also fosters productivity, engagement, and retention. So Aoife, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Brian. Can I just say what an honor it is to be on your podcast? I absolutely love listening to your show. I know we connected through Bev last year, I think it was. And since then, I've been a big fan of the show. So it's such an honor to be here with you today.
Yeah, no, same. You know what I am? I'm one of those folks who I meet a lot of my guests from LinkedIn. And so the fact that Bev introduced us, Bev was on season 2, we really hit it off. I'm glad that I was able to come on your show. Now you're able to come here. And it's just, what's awesome is that this space allows for folks who are so aligned in their messaging to connect. And yeah. That's what I really love about, it's like the good side of social media, if you will, right?
Yes, the positives. The
positive. Absolutely. So, before we start talking a little bit about, your work and Happier at Work, tell us about, your professional background and kind of how you got into the HR space and all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've heard people previously talking about where they grew up. So I grew up in Dublin in Ireland and I went to university there as well. And I stayed working in Dublin at the start of my professional career before seeing the bright big city lights of London. And I moved to London. I worked there for a little time as well, for about 3.5 years. And I knew I really wanted to travel. Again, a topic for a whole other podcast, just all the travels that I've done. But I spent some time working in Australia as well, 2.5 years. And I traveled on my way to Australia. I traveled on my way home from Australia as well. And I had a career spanning almost 20 years working in market research in the CPG, as you call it in the States, or FMCG, as we call it in Europe. So the consumer packaged goods, anything you buy in a supermarket, essentially. And I loved that. It was, taking data, analyzing data, and turning it into insights to solve problems for marketing and sales teams. And I so enjoyed my time doing what I did. And it's the problem-solving nature in me, the gathering data to solve problems. I think that's what really sparks me when I'm at work. And I had some experiences at work. So when I was in Sydney, there was a promotion that was promised to me. It went to my colleague, but it wasn't communicated to me. And when I came back to Dublin and I was working in Dublin, then I was kind of a little bit of a roller coaster ride up and down for about 4.5 years in a role that I really wanted to enjoy, but kind of lost the passion for. So that brought me to where I am today, essentially. So I'm really grateful for those experiences. And about 5.5 years ago, I left my corporate role and I went on to do a coaching certificate initially in career coaching. So I wanted to help people with their careers. And I thought over the course of a weekend, that's going to give me all the tools I need to be able to change the world. It wasn't quite like that. So I went on to do a diploma in coaching for executive and life coaching. And then I started my master's in organizational behavior. And it was then that I really had the kind of the epiphany, if you like, of wow, this is, you can use this data and research for good and for driving positive change within teams. And that's kind of how Happier at Work was born. So it evolved out of those experiences I had from work and those enlightening moments, let's say, when I was doing my studies, and bringing all of that stuff together to create positive change in the world.
Yeah, no, I love that. You mentioned something about, taking that break back in 2018, right? So about 5 years ago. And so, obviously the show is about, folks who have left their job. And at some point, I will like kind of evolve to really talk with folks who have made transitions like these outside of the Great Resignation. And so it's almost perfect that you kind of have this bit of a story, right? So leaving corporate in 2018, can you share like maybe a pivotal moment that actually led to that decision? And really, what did you hope to accomplish by taking that break?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I had that experience in Sydney that just made me want to leave that organization. And when I came back to Dublin, I guess I was hoping for something a lot more positive. And I did love my role. I think for the first 8 months, I absolutely loved it. I put my all into work. And then I just fell out of love with the role. It was sort of a roller coaster. I had changed bosses. I wasn't performing according to them as well as I could have. There was all of these contributing factors, but then things would change. So like the role changed or I got a different boss and things improved for a little while. And then they stopped or things went a bit flat and then they sort of spiraled. So I would say there probably wasn't a single thing that contributed to me wanting to, but it was really a roller coaster over the course of 4.5 years and really thinking this is not the right place for me. Having said that, I can look back now with fresh eyes and see at the time I was in an organization whose values didn't really align with my own. An organization who spoke about their values often, but didn't really live those values either. It was a giant organization. It was really hard to get anything done. But one of the core values of the organization was simple. And it was anything but simple to try and get anything done. If we wanted to send out a marketing email, for example, we needed to get approval from one of two people based in Chicago. This is a global organization and two people having to approve us to send out a local marketing email to our clients locally in Ireland. So that's kind of one example of how it was so not simple and so not aligned with what they talked about. Another kind of maybe pivotal is maybe the wrong word, but I went to speak to a coach. Now, I spoke to various different coaches to find who would be the best one for me. And there was someone who was worryingly inexpensive, let's say. And I thought, I don't really want to go for the cheap one. And there was one that was quite expensive and it was over the course of, say, 6 months. And I thought to myself, I don't have 6 months. I want to get out of here. I want to make this decision. So I went for like a kind of a VIP day style coaching session. And again, in retrospect, what I was really looking for at that time was permission. Permission. It's okay if you quit your job and you have nothing to go to. Because up until that point, I had never quit a job without anything to go to. I always had a reason. I always had like, oh, well, I'm traveling or I'm moving home or whatever it might be. There was always a reason for me to actually to leave and to something to move on to. Whereas this is the first time ever where I left and there was just nothing. There was just nothing after that.
No, that I could imagine kind of the emotions that were at play during that time. And, so now you found this company, Happier at Work, right? And I think the transition from corporate to this is really inspiring as I've, got to learn more about you. And so as you've started this journey, tell people a little bit about Happier at Work and its origins.
Absolutely. And it wasn't always happier at work. When I first started, it was empowerment coaching. And like I
Mm.
said, I was armed with my coaching skills and I wanted to change the world and I wanted to really help with people with their careers. And it's evolved since then. I think because I realized I have so much more to offer. With my corporate experience, I started talking with organizations and understanding more about their problems. I do a lot of speaking in organizations as well. But when I first started, I kind of had this grand vision of what I wanted it to be. And I feel like I'm realizing more and more of that every day. So when I first started, the questions I asked myself were, how could I have made such terrible mistakes in my career? How could I make better decisions when it comes to my career? What do I need to do differently as an individual to understand myself? And how do I know in advance of joining an organization whether or not that's going to be the right organization for me? And just because it's the right organization for you, for example, Brian, doesn't mean it's necessarily the right place for me. So understanding that difference in people as well. And then on the other side, what could the organizations have done differently? So if you think about the organization I worked in Sydney in Australia, I stayed there for less than 18 months. They sponsored my visa. So much like a lot of people working in the States, you have to be sponsored to work in Australia. If you're in Europe, for example, you can work pretty freely within any of the EU member states. But if I'm in Australia, I have to be sponsored to be able to work there. So they sponsored me, and maybe that gave them the assumption that they could treat me in a not very pleasant way, that I was never going to leave because I was being sponsored. But I left, and thinking about, well, how much did that cost them as a business and what could they have done differently to retain me? And then similarly, back in my organization in Dublin, for 4.5 years I was there. I built up relationships. I built up so much knowledge about how things got done. I felt like I really wanted to put my stamp on a lot of different things, but then I left and I took that information, I took that knowledge, I took those relationships with me. So that cost the business as well. So the evolution of it, or at least the kind of seedling, was what could I have done differently as an individual to manage my career better, but also what can organizations do differently to make sure they have the right people. So we hear a lot of people talking about we want the best talent and we want the best and the best. It's not about having the best. It's about creating that right environment for people to really thrive. And we'll talk about this, I think, in a little bit more detail. But for me, that's how I devise the Happier at Work framework. It's about values alignment and understanding as an individual what your values are, how those values align with the values of the organization, whether or not the values are being lived within the organization as well. So is it what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis? The example I used earlier about simple versus the bureaucracy of having to get approval to send out a local email. And then the need satisfaction as well, need satisfaction at work. So how do you understand more about your needs as an individual? And oftentimes, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, what are your needs? I'd be like, I have no idea. But when you feel really frustrated at work. And this is likely because one of your needs is not being satisfied at work. And then we have the strengths piece. So are you working to your strengths? And in my most recent role, I very deliberately took a more senior role on the leadership team, and in an area that wasn't really an area of strength for me, but my options were, and this is how it was presented to me, you can be on the leadership team and manage this team and be seen as a senior leader in the business, or you can report into someone else on the leadership team and do something that you're really good at and that you really enjoy. And of course, the ego spoke and said, leadership team, please. But, again, that's probably a contributing factor to me not enjoying that role because I wasn't really working to my strengths.
Yeah,
so that's the kind of the synopsis, and that's based on the research that I've done as part of that master's.
No, that makes sense. The show got its origins during the pandemic. When you think about that time, we're a little far removed from it now, but, looking back, what's one thing you think you would have done differently during the pandemic? Because at that time, your business you're taking that break in 18. So 2020 comes around. So you were like a couple years in and then boom, the world shuts down.
I
So like what?
started.
Yeah, right.
I
So what's one
started
thing
my
you made?
master's in 2018. So
Mm-hmm.
2020 was kind of the full blown pandemic, and that's when I was working on my dissertation for my master's. I had started the business in 2018, but also very safe in the knowledge that, well, I'm doing this master's at the same time. So when the master's needs more work, I can dial it down on a work perspective and dial it up on a master's. And when things are a bit quieter on the master's, I can dial it down on the master's and kind of dial it up from a work perspective. But trying to manage doing a dissertation during the pandemic, no access to the library, everything had to be done online. Even the meetings with my supervisor, they were all done online. Like when I look back now, it just seems scary. It seems really a really tough thing to do. But I think, I was reflecting on this question because I knew that you'd be talking about the pandemic specifically. But for me, I think the learning going into the pandemic was, wow, how much time am I spending doing things that I'm not sure are beneficial to me? The example there being going out for networking meetings for people who are not necessarily, they're more kind of allies or more for support rather than for business purposes. And the amount of time I saved by not going to those meetings was really apparent at the first kind of signs of the pandemic. I think as time went on, it was about the importance of your health and looking after your health and making sure that you get out. I'm sure it was similar in New York, Brian, but we had these regulations and we use kilometers in Ireland. So, you have to stay within 2 kilometers of your house. And there was times when we couldn't leave the house. But I think one of the things for me, and it's reminding me I need to get back into this, is just stepping outside and going for a walk every day. It helps to clear your mind. It helps to get the blood flowing, and it helps you to think really clearly, I think. But it's for long-term health. I think it's really important to do that. So that was, I think, a big thing was just make sure to look after your health because everything that was going on around us, we saw the importance of looking after ourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you've been a leader in this space, like you said, for some time. And one of the things I've noticed that you emphasize is really about the importance of putting people first, right? Like when we talk about creating a happier workplace, putting people first is really, high on that list. So could you talk to us a little bit about either some strategies or maybe some examples that you've implemented to really help organizations to your point, align their values with what they're actually doing to improve that employee satisfaction?
Absolutely. I think it would help if I first talk a little bit about the happier work framework.
Sure.
So this is something I think that it's it's been there all the time, but I'm finding new language all the time to be able to articulate it. And I'm turning this into a platform. I thought I needed to do all of these fancy bells and whistles, but actually what I really need is people to buy into this concept and just kind of get rolling with it. And essentially it's we have the values, the needs, and the strengths piece that I spoke about earlier. And then it's underpinned by psychological safety because we have to have psychologically safe environments. That's environments where people feel like it's okay to speak up, that they're not going to be reprimanded or ridiculed or given the silent treatment or anything like that. That it's really important that people feel safe to share what's going on for them. And then it's overpinned by leadership because you need really it's really important to have such strong leaders to be able to implement this stuff. So it's one thing to say, this is what we're doing, but you have to have the people on the ground who can implement what you're doing. And, again, we could probably talk on a whole other separate podcast about who should become a leader and should everyone become a leader or should there be other tracks where you're not leading people, but you're leading projects or whatever it might be. But back to the kind of the main concept. So there's the values piece, and I kind of interchange the language with calling it culture as well. So the values piece is so important. The values piece for me is about, first of all, understanding, does the company have values? Do we actually have them clearly defined? Are those values the lived experience of people who work in that organization? So is it how they're experiencing the organization? Is it how they're observing the behavior of other people? And are we celebrating and recognizing and rewarding those values? Are we talking to people about how they are espousing those values and how they are actually showing up when they're doing it well? But also, are we reprimanding is maybe a strong word to use, but are we addressing issues where we see people are not living those values that we really, really care about? And you can't tolerate that bad behavior, because then it will just spread. It will be seen as, oh, well, that's acceptable for that leader to do. So first of all, getting that values piece right. And, I spoke earlier about the best talent versus the right talent. And for me, the values piece is so important no matter what level of the organization you're hiring for. Bringing people in whose values align with those value with the organization is so important. It becomes even more important at those senior levels, because there's a lot more on the line in terms of visibility, in terms of the amount of money that you've spent on hiring this person. There's so many different factors contributing to that. So that's the values piece. And then there's the needs piece, which is, I refer to as balance sometimes, because we have 3 basic psychological needs, but we also have additional individual needs that we have. So on those psychological, the 3 basic psychological universal needs, so they're the needs that we all have, are autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And people might be familiar with that from Daniel Pink's his book Drive. So he talks about these, but he uses slightly different language. But it's about getting that balance right. So if you imagine autonomy, for example, if you give someone too much autonomy, they're lacking direction. They're not really sure what they should do, and they spend an awful lot of time and energy trying to figure out, well, what's the best course of action to take. They don't have enough guidance from the leaders above. But if you give them too little autonomy, it means you're telling them what to do and how to do it. And then they feel this sense of lack of control over what they're doing and how they're doing it. So it's about getting
almost
that
like
micromanagement,
right?
Total micromanagement, exactly. Yeah. So either, 2 extremes, you can be micromanaged on one end, or you can have that complete lack of guidance on the other end, where you're just kind of left to your own devices to figure things out, which takes a lot of time and energy, but maybe arguably not as much time and energy as if you're being micromanaged and you feel like you're being controlled. And then the third element then is around strengths. So that's really understanding strengths. And again, I use this interchangeably with terms like empowerment. So are you creating this environment where people understand what their strengths are, where they're working with other people who are complementary strengths or complementary energy givers or areas? So like an example I always use in this is big picture thinkers versus the tactical thinkers. So you have people who are kind of the big picture, they're doing the strategy, but they may not necessarily excel in strategizing on how to get there. What are the steps? What are the tactical steps that we need to take in order to get to where we're going? And so they might be really good to pair up with someone who can articulate that, or who can rein them in a little bit and say, this is too abstract, this is too big. How do we kind of tone it down a little bit and create that kind of bigger picture? So that's kind of one example, I suppose. But understanding, someone could like spreadsheets. I'm a big spreadsheet nerd. I love using spreadsheets and tick boxes and things like that. But other people maybe don't like doing that. So pair me up with someone who doesn't like doing that, but needs to be able to do it as part of their job. And both of us are going to feel much more energized, because I'm doing something that gives me energy and they're doing less of the stuff that drains their energy if they don't enjoy doing that type of stuff. So that's kind of how I focus on the strengths area.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed in a lot of your episodes, you talk a lot about the future of work, right? And that's a topic that I nerd out a lot on. So, yeah. Thinking about everything that is happening in this space, right? And obviously you're overseas, I'm in the United States, but a lot of similarities. So many rapid changes in all of our working environments because of the pandemic, right? Yeah. Things are not truthfully going to be the same. So what are some things that you are seeing that may be shaping the future of work? And how do you think orgs can really better adapt to try and stay competitive to create these happier workspaces?
Yeah. For me, the future of work, like we talk about it as if it's in the future, but I feel like the future of work is now already.
It is
We're
kind of
seeing,
now. Yeah.
we're seeing all of this stuff happening. For me, it's flexibility. Like that is one overarching area that I'm seeing. It's how we approach work. It's focusing on the outcomes of work rather than the time that we invest in work. So traditionally, we've always thought of things as 9 to 5. And if you don't get your work done, if you finish your work at 3 o'clock, for example, you can be sitting there scrolling on your social media just to show your face and not proactively asking for more work and things like that. So I think it's going to take a huge mindset shift. I see it happening already, but we're not there yet. We need to really focus on the idea that work is about the outcomes that you produce. It's not about the time that you spend at work, which opens up a whole realm of possibility around flexible working hours. So different start times, working with people in different areas, working asynchronously as well. So you're not necessarily working at the same time. You don't have to be in meetings at the same time. You can have conversations through Slack or whatever channel you might want to use to be able to get that work done. So you don't have to be, I was going to say wasting people's time. Oftentimes meetings can be useful, but again, there's sometimes where meetings are not planned properly, or they're just done for the sake of it, or they're not thought through. So you're spending so much of your time in meetings. You feel really busy, but you don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day. In terms of what organizations can do, for me, the biggest thing, because every organization is like, well, what are they doing down the road? Like, what are they doing? So we want to do, like, what are the best practices? What are they doing? The best thing you can do as a leader is ask your own employees, what do they want? What do they say is working? What do they see as the opportunities? But even beyond that, it's not just about asking, it's about asking with the intention of taking action. So don't just ask them and they say, oh, well, we think actually a 4-day week, or we think we'll have Friday afternoons off, would, we'd feel refreshed, or we'd do, they might have all of these ideas, but if there's no possibility to turn those ideas into action, then they're just going to feel deflated and demotivated. So for me, the biggest piece is listen to your own employees. Don't be looking to see what's happening in the market. Your employees may get ideas from what they're reading about the 4-day week or flexible working or, working from home policies, all of those kinds of things. But if that's not going to work in your organization, then, hopefully they'll be honest about that. And again, beyond just listening to your employees, it's about iterating that process. So let's try it for 3 months. And if it's working, let's keep doing it. But if it's not working, like, what can we tweak here to make it better? Because I think one of the worst things you could do is say, yeah, this is probably what, as a result of what has happened as part of the pandemic, is we've given people all of this freedom and flexibility to work from home. And now there's all of these demands to come back to the office, where previously they were shown to be able to do their work perfectly well when they were working from home. And now these calls to come back to the office for no apparent reason.
That's happening overseas as well. Do you see that in some of the areas that you support?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, most people are back to the office 2 or 3 days a week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I really loved about your work as well is your focus, like you mentioned, on data and analytics, right? When you're trying to solve a lot of problems, what does the data show? And so obviously it plays this huge role in how we can, determine and then hopefully then act on a variety of things in the workplace. But are there like specific either success metrics or other types of tools that you find most valuable? And if the goal is we want employees to be happier in our space, what is like a type of metric that you have shown or worked with other organizations to try and start, finding and like, this is what we need to determine to then get this answer?
Yeah.
Like what are some of those metrics?
I feel like in some ways this is a question that sort of evolved over time. And I say that because of a recent podcast episode I spoke to Zach Mercurio on my podcast. As we're recording this today, is the podcast that came out today. So it just was released this morning. Now, he talks about this idea of leading versus lagging indicators. And he talks about leaders being obsessed with this idea of the lagging indicators, things like engagement. So we focus heavily on engagement surveys and measuring people's level of engagement. Actually, he says that's a lagging indicator. What he means by this leading versus lagging indicator is that's an after the fact. What you need to do is get back to the start and kind of look at, well, how do people feel about work in the first place? And he talks about how everything stems from how we feel. So that's kind of my part one of that answer, because he's challenging me on how I look at things, because he also says that happiness is a lagging indicator. Happiness is not a leading indicator, it's a lagging indicator. So he really challenged how I think. Now, second part of that question, which I probably should have talked about first before I talked about the first one, but maybe the first one is the caveat. And the second part is the happiness at work. So it's looking at that sense of, does the organization have values? Are those values aligned with the behavior that you're seeing? Are my own personal values aligned with those of the organization? And then moving on to the needs satisfaction piece. So are my needs being satisfied at work? Do I know what my needs are? Are there areas where I feel frustrated? And you can ask specific questions. And I do this in the Happier at Work audit. So you can ask very specific questions relating to autonomy, relatedness, and competence. As I mentioned, those are the three kind of foundational needs, the three universal needs that we all have. But then there are specific needs that other people might have. Like they might have a need for flexibility. They might have a need for status. They might have a need for security and stability. That pandemic maybe has taken some of that sense of security and stability away. And then there's the third element, which is around strengths. So do I get the opportunity to use my strengths at work? How often do I use my strengths at work? Do I know what my strengths are? Do I work with people whose strengths are complementary to my own strengths as well? So do I get the opportunity to really thrive at work, essentially? And combined, all of those things together gives a score then of happiness at work. But as I said, I'm being challenged a little bit already on how I think about happiness at work and whether that's a lagging indicator. And I should maybe go back even earlier and think about, well, how do people feel about work when they're performing in their roles? How do they feel about how they're performing in their roles before thinking about what is the impact of that performance?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great point. That's something I'm going to check out that episode today. That's interesting that it would, because the surveys kind of, obviously they serve their purpose. But you're right that a lot of times they are capturing things that truthfully have already happened. But what is it that we can ask to, in a best guess estimate that is going to predict, folks, if they're going to stay longer, if they're going to be fulfilled, whatever the case may be. That I'm very intrigued by that.
Yeah. And that's where I would love to get to as well with what I'm doing, and being able to predict that kind of stuff. For me, again, going back to the Happier at Work framework and the questions I just talked about, if you bring in someone into an organization whose values align, if you can satisfy their needs, and if you can give them an environment where they can thrive and they can do their best work and they feel like they're being challenged while also contributing, then I think for me, that's an opportunity beyond money. And I know you've talked about this on the podcast before. It's not about the money. It's about the contribution you make. It's about the people that you get to work with as well. If you can create that environment, people are going to stay for longer.
Yeah. Speaking from personal experience, I think I'm kind of in that space right now, right? Like, yeah, there's potentially opportunities to make more money elsewhere, but the things that I get a chance to be involved with here have such a deep impact on me that I'm like, oh, okay, this is sustaining me for now. Yeah. And that is a huge piece. I'm glad that you raised that. One of the things I love talking about here, and as I think about your story, is really about advice for other folks. And one of the things that kind of hits me with your story is, when we talked about it earlier, was you leaving, right? And you deciding to take this career break. I think there's a lot of people who really truthfully very dream about leaving their corporate role to either pursue their passions or whatever, however you want to phrase it. So when you think about that, what maybe what advice do you have for someone who might be contemplating like a similar kind of career shift, especially during, uncertain times like now, right? Like what would you say to them?
I'd say don't do what I did. For me, no, honestly, it's I think you can build something on the side. First of all, that's what I didn't do. I was so keen to get out of the situation that I was in that I didn't really have any foundation when I started building the business. I was also doing a master's part time while I was doing the business as well. So my advice is try and build something on the side and see if there's a market there for what it is that you want to do. There are so many tools out there that you can use to figure out what exactly it is that you want to do. You can reach out to mentors, to coaches to help you through that process of figuring out what is it that I'm kind of lacking in my life that I want to bring, or how do I contribute, or how do I want to be remembered by other people. There's so many tools and resources out there that you can use. My second piece of advice would be to gather people around you who can support you. There are so many networks out there. I'm sure it's the same in the US as it is in Ireland. There are so many networks that support entrepreneurs when you're getting started. There's various different grants that you need to know about. Like there's so many different opportunities to connect with other people. But don't, find people who align with you and who are on that similar journey. Not everyone is going to be on that same journey as you. So don't kind of feel like you have to be friends with everyone just because they're doing something similar. If you don't, again, for me, it's this values piece without kind of asking people directly what their values are, see how they show up. And if that's something that you want to be part of, if you want to be kind of within their orbit, then, maybe you'll gravitate towards each other. So two kind of pieces of advice there for me. First of all, figure out is it viable? Is it something worth doing by building it on the side first? And then secondly, find those people whose values align and share in what it is that you want to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned something about the tools that are out there. Obviously being on LinkedIn very, very often, I have learned so much about, and truthfully, it is information overload about the many tools that are available for folks to really start and kickstart that, right? There's creators who have things that help people kickstart things. But you're right. I think that's great advice that folks just gotta, truthfully put some action towards it. So
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned that. And now when you think about the future of Happier at Work, not only the organization, but the podcast, right? You got runner-up awards, right? You're getting a lot of good accolades, which I'm very, very excited to see. What are some of your really like future plans and aspirations for the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
I know you're creating this platform, so you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like my big thing for next year is to create this platform. So the wheels are in motion already. It's up to now, I think I haven't found the vocabulary. I haven't found the words to use to describe what it is that I want to do. Hopefully I've explained it well enough. The concept of, this is the Happier at Work framework. I want this to be a one-stop shop for happiness at work, for workplace culture, and for people to manage their careers. So it's both sides of the coin. As an individual, how do you get the most from your career, and how do you manage your career strategically? By understanding yourself a little bit more, by understanding what's out there, by managing and thinking about it strategically. Whereas a lot of people, I think, wait for opportunities to come to them. They wait for, especially in their own organizations, they wait for their boss to present them with various different opportunities, or maybe they keep their search to just within the area that they're in, whatever that might be. So this is a tool to help people to think more strategically. On the opposite side, then, it's for organizations to create that positive culture where people can really thrive. So how do you get the most from your people? How do you create that really positive environment based on the different pillars that I talked about? But beyond that, I know that I can't do everything on my own. So it's having very specific experts in very specific areas of niche that are all related to this big grand whole of creating that great work culture that no one wants to work in a culture that's not very empowering. If you talk to anyone, they want to work in a positive work culture where they can do their best work. So it's about finding that and maintaining that as well, because once you create that culture, it's about maintaining it. So like you can't just decide what the culture is. You have to do it through your everyday. What are the different relationships that you have at work? What are the behaviors that are showing up? And how do you actually manage that actively?
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I'm excited to see you get this off the ground. I've heard, we've talked about it a couple times, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it unveils, because I think a lot of the things that you not only talk about it on your show, but the work that you're doing, it really resonates, especially at a time like now, right? I don't think that, this is my own personal opinion. I don't know if we were really talking much, or maybe we may have been talking about it, but the action around how people felt at work, make sure they're happier at work, if you will, was that big of a focus, let's say 5-6 years ago, right? I just don't think it was something that was talked about often. The pandemic, I think, had a lot to do with some of these things, because it's just exposed so much. And now, what's funny, I had one guest who mentioned, it's like you give people this taste of this freedom, if you will, and now you're trying to bring all this stuff back. This is causing a whole host of issues, right? So one of the ways you can make people happier at work is, look, recognize that things are working, right? And let's not try to, do this type of, bringing folks back that are, arguably maybe it's about real estate costs, right? And so those are things that I'm excited to see, how this program really rolls out. One of the things I really love about this season too is I've been adding in a question, truthfully, for me, right? And so when you think about, anything, either the show or some of the things that I may be doing, what's one question that you have for me that I could potentially answer?
Well, I'd love to know what the future holds for you. So you're saying you have these various different opportunities, but the impact that you're having now is such that it's likely that you'll stay. I'd love to know, do you have a vision for 5 years' time, for example, of where you'd like to see yourself in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, I've had a couple of opportunities these past few years to see things in my work. So I work in healthcare, for those who maybe, if this is your first episode of Why I Left, right? But I currently work in healthcare, a very large organization here in New York. And I have gotten an opportunity to be a part of a lot of these educational initiatives that are exposing young people to the opportunities that exist in healthcare. And I did not know how much that would impact me, and truthfully, until I started working in it. And so I've kind of found this sweet spot where I like this and I want to grow in this space, right? There's opportunities that we have with schools in the city. And then I think there's other opportunities that are that exist potentially on, Long Island, maybe Westchester. And so I would say, it's hard. The 5-year question is tough for me because my life and career has been, I used to have some I want to do X by X.
Yeah.
And I've had certain, like my last role came out of nowhere. And I was like, you know what? I need to be a bit more nimble. So what I would say then is that, to your point around values, the values that I have, I always talk about, how do I positively impact the human experience, right? How can I do that? And so the work that I'm doing day to day is doing that, right? Touching the lives of kids and making sure that they know what exists for them in healthcare. So I'm very much value aligned in that regard. And then on the outside, some of the work I'm doing here, like with the show, my big pillars: information, inspiration, and motivation, right? So I think about that. What am I doing? What is the content that I'm putting out there that helps people think differently about the decisions that they make when it comes to work, right? So my theme, like where the show is going, is I do want to open it up, or I will open it up around resignations as a whole. Like I feel like that's a good niche for me, because my premise is that we don't talk about resignations enough. I don't think it should be a taboo topic. We all have worked and work, right? And at times there are periods where we need to then exit a role. And there are pivotal exits that have had really big impact on folks that I want us to talk more about, right? What led up to that? And then what are the things that you're now doing? What is the insights that you gained from that? So it'll be more than great resignation talk, but it'll just be, I'm going to go back to ideally, it'd be great to interview like a Mark Cuban, if you will, to say, hey, you made this decision to get out of this space and now you're running the Mavericks, right? Like there's some thought process behind that. So I want to highlight those stories.
Yeah.
So those are really my goals. I'm sorry, it was kind of a long answer, but I think it's important because what you mentioned about the values piece is something that is really resonating with me in the work that I do day to day and the work that I do on the side.
Yeah.
And so as long as I can keep kind of satisfying that internally, I feel like I'm giving back in that way. I'm doing what I said I would do and what I wanted to do, but I'm also then impacting others in a positive way.
I realized after I asked the question that it was very like an old school interview style. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? It's not how I meant it at all. It was more like, what's the vision for it?
Yeah.
But something that really resonated with me that you said, Brian, was this idea of helping people to understand how they make decisions. Because at the end of the day, how we make decisions on a day-to-day basis should be guided by our values, but sometimes it's not. That we get distracted by what other people want or how we want to be perceived by other people, when we really need to kind of sit in discomfort at times and think about, well, what are our values and how are my values showing up in this situation? But helping people to recognize that, I think, is such a noble thing to be doing. So I applaud you for that. Well done.
No, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And look, and I appreciate you coming on the show today. I have really loved our conversations over these past couple of years. And thank you again, Bev, if you're watching this one. Thank you for connecting us. Would love for you to share where folks can support the work that you're doing, maybe learn about the platform, and obviously listen to your show too.
Yeah, I think probably the number one, since you're listening or watching this podcast today, is to search for Happier at Work. So I'm on all podcast platforms and I'm on YouTube as well. Second thing I would like to say is search me on LinkedIn, but I always need to spell my name for people because anyone who's not a native Irish speaker might have some difficulty with the spelling of my name, which is Aoife, and it's pronounced Aoife. So Aoife, O''Brien, O'Brien. And you'll find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. I'm also on Instagram as well, but I'm not going to kind of bombard everyone with loads of different information. I think the first protocol should be to head on over to the podcast Happier at Work.
Perfect. Good deal. Well, look, that'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank Aoife O'Brien for joining me today. Look, the work that she's doing with Happier at Work, not only the show, but her organization, I think is going to be really impactful in the future. So definitely hope you all get a chance to check that out. Her information is going to be in the show notes. And look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll definitely see you next time. Aoife, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.